Kia ora koutou. This next section that we're going to have a look at is we're going to talk about the temple. Now, the temple was really the heart of Jewish worship, and we really start to see the temple appear in the Old Testament around the time of King David and King Solomon, his son. And that was when the first permanent temple was actually built. So King Solomon built the temple. King David was allowed to bring all the materials together and had the plans for the temple, but he, for various reasons, wasn't allowed to actually build the temple. And the first temple, which is what the Temple of Solomon is actually considered, was apparently really ornate and richly adorned with gold. And there was a really significant item that was part of the temple, King Solomon's temple, and that was the Ark of the Covenant, which was present in the Holy of Holies, so a special part of the temple. And this is significant because this is where it was considered by the Jewish people that God actually lived and ruled all creation from on earth. And when King Solomon actually built and dedicated the temple, he dedicated it to God and prayed that the temple would be a blessing to people of all nations. Now, the temple was actually destroyed about 400 years later after King Solomon actually built it, and when the Babylonians actually conquered Jerusalem. And they conquered Jerusalem, or they did stuff in Jerusalem about 3 times, and the last time they actually destroyed the temple. And we see that in 2 Kings 25, verse 9. And the temple was burnt and demolished by the command of Nebuchadnezzar. And a lot of the things that were inside of the temple, including the Ark of the Covenant, were actually taken away from Jerusalem and back to Babylonia. And that is significant. We'll come on to the significance of that in a moment. A number of years later, the Jewish people, or the Israelites, came back to Jerusalem, were allowed back to Jerusalem by the then Persians, because the Babylonian kingdom was overtaken by the Persians, and the Persians actually allowed the Israelites to come back to Jerusalem, and they rebuilt Jerusalem, but they also rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem, the physical temple in Jerusalem. And we see this rebuilding of the temple in the Old Testament, in the books of 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Haggai, and Zechariah. And this is known as the second temple that is built in Jerusalem when the Israelites came back from captivity. It was nowhere near as fancy as the first temple, and unfortunately, the Ark of the Covenant never came back to the temple. So the second temple didn't have that real presence of God in the Holy of Holies with the Ark of the Covenant. We do have, however, a little diagram here of what scholars believe the second temple actually looked like. This is from the New Living Application Study Bible. And this is the sort of the central part of the temple that we're actually starting to see here. And there was a tall building at the back of the central part of the temple, which was called the Holy of Holies. And so you can see here just a picture or photo of a model of what that second temple would have actually looked like at the time of Jesus. And this temple is, as I said, it's a model. You can actually go to Jerusalem today and see this model. And this is what both the temple and the Jerusalem would have looked like at the time of Jesus. And if we zoom in a little bit closer so that we can actually see what's going on here with the temple, you can see on the left-hand side, there's what we call a colonnade, which was where rich people sort of hung out. Right in the middle, you see the Holy of Holies, which is that tall building there. Then you see some walls around that Holy of Holies, and there's some other courts amongst that, which was where a lot of the Jewish people were allowed to go in and worship God. And then between the colonnade and sort of inside that outer wall, there was the court of the Gentiles. And this was where people like myself, being what would have been considered a Gentile at the time, would have been able to go and worship God in that court of the Gentiles. And this is also the court of the Gentiles, is where Jesus, when he arrived in Jerusalem one time, actually cleared out all those money changers and all the people who were basically doing business in this court, because it was supposed to be a place where Gentiles could worship God. And when people were actually running their businesses there, that meant that we wouldn't have been able to worship God from that courtyard. And so that's why he gets a little bit upset about that, and he clears out that temple. And that's, I guess, temple courts. And I guess that's coming back to when King Solomon actually dedicated the temple. It was dedicated to all nations. And so by running a business out of that court of the Gentiles, all nations weren't actually allowed or able to worship Jesus. Or at the time, it would have been God. Now, the Second Temple was destroyed with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and it never has been rebuilt as a physical building in Jerusalem. You can see here a picture of Jerusalem today, and this is actually what's known as the Temple Mount. And instead of being a Jewish temple there, we actually see that there's a mosque. That's what that building is, with the gold dome there in this picture, instead of the Holy of Holies, which we would expect to see there if the temple had been rebuilt. The only part of the temple that actually remains after that destruction in 70 AD is the Western Wall. It's sometimes referred to as the Wailing Wall. And you see a lot of people actually coming to this Wailing Wall to pray, especially Jewish people, but you also see other people praying at the Western Wall as well. Now, the nation of Israel is actually waiting for another temple to be built in Jerusalem. So a third temple to be built in Jerusalem, physically built in Jerusalem. But with the coming of Jesus and the writing of the New Testament, we actually start to see a different vision of what that third temple is all about. And instead of being a physical building where people gather to worship, we start to hear Jesus and the disciples talking about the temple being the church, but also being individual people. And we see this in multiple places throughout the New Testament, but the one that I wanted to draw attention to was actually 1 Peter 2, verses 4 to 6, where we actually start to see the disciples referring to God's people as living stones that are being built up into a church that is going to be a spiritual house. And we are the holy priesthood that worships in that spiritual house. And we offer up spiritual sacrifices to God through Jesus Christ, which was very similar to the actual physical sacrifices that happened in the temple during the first and second temple times. So that's a little bit about the temple in both the Old Testament and the New Testament.